Hey, welcome to part 6 of the God of War commentary. Welcome to the Desert of Lost Souls.
Why is there a desert in Greece?
Why is there a jungle in Russia?
When is there a jungle in Russia?
Metal Gear Solid
Greece.
3.
Oh, right, yeah. Why is there a jungle in Russia?
The answer
There
is...
is a desert in Greece, Lemnos.
Oh.
But this is called the Lost Souls.
But the back of the boat says Honey Bunch.
Well, you know, I'm not exactly sure what Lemnos means, but it probably means something else in English since it's a Greek word.
It probably means box pushing in Greece.
Oh, God.
Anyway, we are in the transition to our second major area of God of War, and that is Pandora's Temple. More on that later. We have to traverse through the Desert of Lost Souls to get there. It's almost, in a way, like...
Oh, it's our second.
Desert.
It's our second level. Miyamoto!
It's almost like what?
It's kind of like the Gerudo Desert in Ocarina of Time.
Oh.
You know, we're on our way to the Spirit Temple. But before we do that, we gotta go through the desert.
Yeah. I do like the Titan. The Titan is a nice...
Kronos.
It's a nice piece of Greek imagery that doesn't rely on tits, and I appreciate that.
Though it is buck-ass nude in the desert.
Yeah, I know.
So, in order to get to our next destination, we have to follow the Song of the Sirens. What that means, essentially, is make sure you're not listening to any podcasts or music and fucking rave out like it's Saturday night.
Basically, jump around like an idiot until you hear something, and then kill them.
Yeah, you're listening to the sirens' noise. If it gets louder, you're really close. But what I wanted to do first is that the Song of the Sirens, the Desert of Lost Souls, has a lot of chests. And I wanted to take a sidestep there to get them all before I decided to actually proceed with the game's story. By the way, I love how you can definitely tell this is an HD remaster because Kratos quite clearly froze in time as the cutscene loaded the siren.
Yeah.
And that happens with a lot of games that were originally a 4:3 ratio that were upgraded to 16:9.
But it's a desert. Can I just go around it?
Speaking of Greek imagery, we're 6 parts in, and it only actually just occurred to me to mention this. But, the way human bodies were portrayed by Greeks in particular, and I don't just mean I don't mean any specific gender. I actually mean human bodies in general. Basically, nothing like the way we consider them today, because the human ideal of what men and women are supposed to look like has surprisingly changed with basically every civilization had their own different idea of it. And this game is very clearly built to our modern sensibilities. So when I think about it, the way a lot of characters look is very distinctly not in sync with the Greek imagery that they're going for.
Yeah, you go to a natural cave system and you see these smears on the wall and you think nothing of it, but back when we were primordial oozes, it was very lewd.
So they probably would not have envisioned a siren to look like this, for example. Not because they wouldn't have envisioned it to be seductive, but because their idea of seductive was different. So that is a thing.
The boobs, yes, but I don't understand the giant mouth.
And they certainly wouldn't have, envisioned a hero with this kind of bald head and goatee combination going on. That is very edgy, the hedgy 20th century. Well, 21st century, I suppose. Early 21st. Same difference. The 2000s hadn't entirely shaken weird 90s sensibilities. They just started to become a little more self-aware of them, if I remember.
And we bring up a point to, mention all the times, we see a female in this game that's not Athena, that got a bit of nipple slip going on.
Always.
Yeah. It's distracting nowadays, but again, it's representative of the time.
I think it's more the audience than the time, because you get this kind of for lack of a better word, trashy sort of appeal and pretty much everything aimed to this audience, no matter what.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
I'd
but-
say, in our modern, like, 80s, 90s, 2000s, even 2010s, they all appeal to these sort of.
Yeah, all you
kind of
really need
things.
to point to is 90s comic book art.
Oh yeah, like honestly, God of War would not be out of place on the Image Comics rack.
Well, yeah, the anatomy is probably better than 90s comic book art.
Liefeld.
It's not hard to get much better than Liefeld.
There's a particular Captain America cover that springs to mind where
God,
Captain America's chest makes no sense. You know the one. I don't even have to link it.
I love the MCU Photoshop of that.
where it's like Chris Evans' chest is weirdly misproportioned and sticking out on the wrong way.
Yeah, and he has a tiny little head.
I also love when they try to take the women and where like their waists are like pencil thin and their bodies contort so that both their boobs and their ass can be facing you at the same time, which is physically impossible. And you try to show it from a different angle, and then they just look like deformed freaks. It's amazing.
Maybe their contortion is their superpower.
Well, Mr. Fantastic could probably pose like that now that I'm thinking about it, but would you want him to is the better question.
Now, you see, you can talk about the moral implications of all of this stuff, but the real conversation is how gloriously stupid the 90s were. Oh, man.
So Pandora's temple, the entire thing, is strapped on the back of a Titan, Kronos.
Yeah.
I don't think Kronos and Pandora had anything to do with each other in the myths, though. Because, like, Kronos was, like, at the beginning of time, and the gods were like, fuck you, dude, and then they all fucked him up. And Pandora...
I think Zeus meant that literally.
Yeah, and then Pandora was just like, hey, a box! Oh, crap, no!
Let my people...
Pandora
Let
was...
me go, I guess.
Pandora was basically the Greeks going, lol, women's cause all the evil problems. But, the thing is, Greek myths aren't exactly the most cohesive thing in the world, because they weren't... there wasn't really a Bible for this stuff. They were disconnected stories that were told and retold and reiterated and reimagined over and over by a bunch of
And we all know how the
people.
game Telephone goes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
basically it. So there are different versions of a whole bunch of stuff. Pandora, for example, I'm pretty sure there are multiple versions of the Pandora story as well.
I believe that it's the Pandora's box thing is
Jar.
actually... Yeah, it's a mistranslation of jar, I think, which is more
It's
accurate.
It's not exactly a mistranslation, more of a taking a liberty with the English language, because Pandora's jar doesn't sound quite as pretty to the ears.
I got a jar of sins, I got a jar of sins, and guess what's inside it?
It sounds like an antique item, Pandora's jar. Allows me to draw 2 cards.
But what does Pot of Greed do?
Sit down, Ryan, I'll tell you all about it.
Why is Pot of Greed banned?
Because it's
Because
broken as shit.
because-
Why?
you-
You just
you-
get a
you-
few more cards. What's
yeah,
so bad
that's
about that?
that's
You
the
can-
thing.
You
Okay.
can just put so many in there, you can just keep drawing
you
cards so you get what you
cards
want.
in your deck with no penalty.
Okay,
It's
here's
just
the thing.
free
Okay,
drawing.
it's simple mathematics. Most cards in a trading card game are a give and take scenario. You give a card and you either gain a 1-card advantage over your opponent for it, or through clever combinations of cards you manage to gain a number of advantage over it. The Pot of Greed card is a 1-card for 2-card trade. It is inherently
+1.
unbalanced. Yeah,
We're talking tournament talk, we call that a +1.
it is a free advantage with no drawbacks. So even in the version of the ban list without any actual banned cards, you are only allowed to use 1 Pot of Greed. If you had 3 pots of Greed in your deck, that's basically an ace deck thinner right there, which increases your odds of getting the cards you want. All of the
And I shall blow on my horn of heaven.
there's actually a card called Horn of Heaven, now that I think about it.
You know-
Basically, every card drawing card that is allowed in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now has a sacrifice involved to balance out the fact that you are getting more cards and thinning out your deck, though.
Thinking about the myths, it probably would have made more sense to have Atlas hold up this temple than.
No, Atlas is in God of War 2.
Oh, okay, never mind then.
Atlas holds up the Earth.
Yeah, I
And-
know, but if you're taking liberties with the gods, he's the god who's holding giant shit on his back. So it makes more sense to me in that way.
Yeah.
Oh, he
But
looks
is it-
really sad. The poor guy. I just want to give him a hug.
This is supposed to be a punishment that Zeus put Kronos under. So yeah.
I feel
Also,
bad for him.
Forced to walk
This
the desert
is a
until the
stunning
sand
moment.
tears his flesh off.
Unfortunately, it had to be pre-rendered, and I sort of understand why. But just seeing the scale of the Titan compared to your super.
Scaling the Titan was originally a level that they had to cut out. You can find it in behind-the-scenes footage that you unlock after beating the game. You were supposed to originally climb Kronos on the way to Pandora's temple, but they just didn't have the time for it.
That's
Shadow
unfortunate.
Of the Colossus.
That's unfortunate, but at the same time, it's a fucking climbing level, and this game doesn't do climbing all that well. In case you haven't noticed. So.
Less climbing, more like more platforming, because the floor was constantly crumbling underneath you.
Oh, okay.
So you had to haul ass to one point.
That I can understand. It's just that everything involving climbing in this game has some janky aspect to it, from jumping from vine to vine to fighting while you're climbing, which.
Well, the thing I immediately missed going from God of War 2 to 1 is that there is no way to rapidly descend off a wall.
Yeah.
You have to do a slow climb down, and it's like God of War 2, you can, Kratos is smart. He uses Blades of Chaos to slide down the fucking thing, and you can't do that in this game. It sucks.
So here we are, Temple of Pandora.
Kind of reminds me of that thing that the Prince does in Prince of Persia 2008, where he has that clawed gauntlet. So when you want to slide down a wall, he just digs in his claws and slides down for a little bit.
Couldn't I have just climbed up the wall at the start?
It looks much smaller from far away.
Those pulled back sweeping views are basically God of War's trademark, and I am going to miss them in God of War. In fact,
You don't think they'll have them in God of War?
well, you've got that Last of Us-esque behind-the-shoulder camera the whole time, so no.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it could pan back, though, for like a set piece.
It could, but it probably won't, because it's essentially trying to distance itself from everything God of War gameplay did. And you know what? Let's have that tangent now. I mentioned it several parts ago. What the fuck? Okay, the story direction I understand, but why the fuck are... why does it look like Kratos is flailing at the monsters like Isaac from Dead Space with his frickin' gun swinging like a stupid person at the monsters?
I think it's it's deliberate on Kratos' part to not lose his shit.
No. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking on what planet that seems like a good game design decision.
I don't know, maybe Kratos designed the game.
It's like, okay, when Resident Evil 4 did this shit, it tried to evolve what was there in the previous games to a point, but it didn't dumb itself down. It did the basic survival horror elements, but with just more of an action bent.
Well,
Even
I still think that
I'm not. That's not my point. Is not that they shouldn't have. My point is that even that was enough to put off longtime fans of the franchise. So, where does turning God of War into a melee-based Last of Us clone seem like a good way to retain your core audience?
I think maybe what they're trying to do. I'm not saying if they should do it or not, but I think I see the intention. Because I said earlier about how, even though it wasn't what you're asking, how Kratos is trying to keep things reserved after, the original God of War series. Maybe they're also trying to reflect that in gameplay by slowing it down. You know what I mean? Now, whether or not it'll work is a different issue, but I think they're going more Tomb Raider Last of Us because they don't want to be as over the top as before, because that's what got Kratos and all that shit in the first place. And maybe it's just a reflection of how he's just trying to take it easy.
Possibly. Or possibly they're just following the trend.
There's that too, which is most likely the reason.
It's just...
Also probably that even though it's still overall a good series for all the games, it got kind of repetitive and it got flack for that.
Yeah, but you know what else is repetitive? Last of Us clones, because we've had far too many of them in recent years. And God of War actually does have its own unique gameplay identity, which they are completely throwing out.
Well, there's the thing. You say Last of Us clone. I didn't think Last of Us was that new or refreshing.
No, it wasn't.
Really.
In fact,
It's
it
just
was
well
really
polished.
just it was really just a less over-the-top version of Uncharted, with you know, a more serious story attached to it and a stronger emphasis on stealth and survival and resource management. But you know, that general approach to behind-the-back third-person action gameplay is what I'm referring to. I say Last of Us clones because it only really became the fad to copy it around the time Last of Us was popular. It's ironic in the sense that God of War was sort of one of those games where the trend following people copied God of War in the past, but now God of War is copying another series entirely. But the worst part about it is that I don't think anyone is, once the game comes out, I don't think anyone is going to, unless they drastically change the combat style from what we've seen, which is kind of slow and clunky. I don't think anyone is going to see, even if it's really good, I don't think anyone is going to see God of War as a good God of War game. Like, at best, it's going to be one of those things where people try to say, if you look at it as its own thing, it's really great. But
as a God of War game, it falls flat.
Yeah, but here's the thing about that. You know, I can say that about Castlevania Lords of Shadow, but I'm not going to say it to a Castlevania fan, because I know what the Castlevania fans' problem is. The Castlevania fans' problem is that their Castlevania game is not a Castlevania game, no matter how the in-between portable game wants to spin it. So, yeah. I'm at a loss for how to feel about God of War because I don't know whether I'm going to like it for its own thing. Its own thing doesn't look particularly interesting, and the only interesting thing for me as a person who liked the old God of War series to a point is that the story direction they picked is actually pretty appropriate for Kratos. It's basically the only way you could possibly turn him into a vaguely relatable human being from where he was at the end of the third game. But,
And he needed it big time if they were going to continue the story, so...
Oh, yeah.
Because by the end of 3, they attempt to do something with him by the end of 3. But in the entirety of 3, he's a douchebag.
Yeah, well, you know, give him some time to cool his jets, and then have him take a second stab at doing what he fucked up at before in the very beginning of the story. And that is basically the textbook example of how to work a character redemption plot. Once they've had time to develop a sense of self-awareness or possibly self-loathing, give them a chance to face indirectly what they faced before and failed at. If it is in the form of a dead person or dead family, then give them a chance to have another family, and then have them struggle with the feelings that brings up. That is a good story direction for Kratos, and I don't agree at all with this guy is too much of an asshole to ever be likable plot, because making him likable and giving him a redemption plot are not necessarily the same thing. You don't have to like someone for them to redeem themselves. They just have to have their own personal development toward that end. But reflecting it in the gameplay is only worthwhile if it's not to the detriment of the entire gameplay style. And that's not to say, like, a story aspect reflected in gameplay hinders the gameplay on purpose to make a point, that is a way of doing things, yeah. But hindering the gameplay to make a point and changing the entire genre of game are, well, that's they're worlds apart.
All right.
It doesn't have nearly the same effect.
Buy Lewis's book now. It's on the New York Times bestseller.
Yeah. Tune in next time when we find out of whether or not the boss fight in Shovel Knight is indeed canon.